All right, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for October 28, 2009. First item on the agenda is consideration of minutes for the regular meeting of September 23, 2009. Those minutes are included with the agenda. Are there any revisions or questions about those minutes? All right, if not, those minutes will stand approved as presented. Next item on the agenda is application Z09060 by Mr. Joe Chrisman. I've been advised by staff that that application has been withdrawn, at least temporarily.
Yes, that's correct, Chairman Rogers. We tentatively expect to see it on the November 23rd agenda. But we will re-advertise for the, if it comes back up in November or whenever it comes back up, we'll re-advertise for it in the Murfreesboro Post and send the legal notices out as well.
Okay, very good. Then we'll move on to special use permit requests, application Z09061 by Ms. Lynn Swafford for Providence Christian Academy, requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, a private school, in a residential single-family RS-15 zone. This is for property located at 410 DeJarnett Lane. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application for us, please. Ms. Swafford, we'll get, as soon as he's done with the presentation, then we'll come back and get any comments that you might have.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our first item that we'll be reviewing today is, as you mentioned, a special use permit in order to expand an existing private school, which we classify as an institutional group assembly use. Property is zoned RS-15 at 410 DeJarnett Lane. It's the existing site of the Providence Christian Academy. As you know, institutional group assembly uses require a special use permit in residential zoning districts, and single-family residential zoning districts, that is. We've seen this property before numerous times for different expansions that they've done. The latest is for a parking lot expansion, and what I'd like to do now is show you the overhead, kind of give you an idea of what they're doing. The area on the east side of the building, this is oriented to face north this way. This is DeJarnett Lane, and this is adjacent to the Northwoods subdivision here. To the west of the site is the North Springs subdivision, but there's still a great deal of undeveloped land on the west side of the school that's currently served as an effective buffer between the school and the subdivision North Springs to the west. But it directly abuts several lots in the Northwoods subdivision to the east. And you'll recall back in 2007 or 2008, we saw a special use permit request for athletic fields at the southeast corner of the subject property. This parking lot is just to the north of where the athletic fields are located. The existing parking lot is to be expanded by about 75 parking spaces. That's roughly a 70 to 80% increase in parking. So with that amount increase, we're requiring them to go back before the board, considering an expansion that requires a special use permit. The majority of the additional parking will be within the existing parameters of the existing parking lot. Some of the areas that are currently grass within the parking lot will be paved to add additional parking spaces, and it will slightly encroach, as you can see here, towards the east to the neighboring Northwoods property line. One thing that I will mention is that we did not require the applicant to provide a photometric lighting plan because the applicant is not adding any additional lighting on site. So there will be no additional lighting spillover from what is there right now to the east to the Northwoods subdivision. All the lights will stay in their same locations except for one which will be relocated just a short distance. To the east, there is a pretty thick tree line which borders those three lots in Northwoods that I referenced in the staff comments, 78, 79, and 80. Those three lots, as I mentioned, have a thick tree line as well as a privacy fence that's owned by Providence Christian Academy along that property line. You'll recall when the athletic fields went before the Board of Zoning Appeals, one of the conditions of approval was that there be a Type C buffer along that eastern property line. And what the school did was just supplement the existing fence and tree line in order to be able to achieve that Type C buffer. And right now what I'll show you on the overhead is you'll see here to this along the southern half of the parking lot expansion where the tree line is not as dense, they have shown supplementing that with additional trees. And so they've taken the recommendation of staff. They're not labeling it as a Type C buffer. What I'd like to do is any approval, and I'll read the condition here momentarily, but any approval be conditioned upon them meeting the intent of a Type C buffer with existing new plant materials combined along with the fence, and that would be at the review and approval of Ms. Holloway. One of the good things that this plan does is you'll notice on the ride around when we were out this morning that there's an existing dumpster that is actually in this area here that is currently not in an enclosure and is currently visible from DeJarnette Lane. What they're planning on doing is relocating that dumpster to within a brand new enclosure, and which would have landscape screening around it to the rear of the building. So it would be moved further away from Northwoods and would be placed behind the building out of sight of the motorists on DeJarnette Lane. One of the concerns that our city traffic engineer had, and this was something that the applicant was trying to alleviate with this plan, was to help better manage traffic during pickup and drop-off times. According to the applicant, they had some issues during those times, especially with traffic backing up, because there wasn't enough stacking space. So they're trying to get some additional stacking space, and hopefully this plan will achieve that. The applicant's engineer has been working with our traffic engineer to come up with an optimal plan, and they have just gotten him a plan this morning which is not reflected on the large plans that you have before you. But of course, in the conditions that I'll read, I'd like for the approval to be subject to Mr. Balachandra's approval of the traffic circulation plan. Because what's internal doesn't, it's not as much of a concern as how it affects the public right-of-way in DeJarnette Lane. And what we don't want to have happen is that there be confusion and cars stacking out onto the public street, which is more of the city's responsibility to make sure that the public streets stay safe. So if the board approves this request, staff recommends the following conditions. The Planning Commission must grant site plan approval of the proposed development, or at the planning director's discretion, the planning staff may approve the site plan administratively. Number 2, provision should be made for a Type C buffer along the eastern property line adjacent to lots 78 through 80 of Northwoods. The final landscape plan, including review of all existing materials in the eastern tree line, will be subject to the review and approval of the city horticulturist. And number 3, the site plan will be subject to the final review and approval of the city traffic engineer so that there is no negative impact on the public street, DeJarnette Lane. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Ms. Wofford is in attendance to answer any questions from the applicant's point of view for you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Thank you, Ms. Wofford. Anything you'd like to add to the application? No. Okay. Then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward, state your name, your address, and any comments that you might have. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
If there aren't any questions, I'll make a motion that we approve the application subject to the staff comments.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Ms. Swafford, that application has been granted. Thank you. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, we'll move on to application Z09062 by Mr. Dan Ongst for the Boy Scout Troop 197 of Fellowship United Methodist Church, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary outdoor vending establishment, which is Christmas tree sales, at an institutional group assembly use, which would be a place of worship, in a residential single-family RS-15 zone, and this is for property located at 2511 New Salem Highway. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Subject property, as you mentioned, is at 2511 New Salem, which is located at the southwest corner of New Salem Highway and Salem Creek Boulevard. The property is currently developed, as you know, with Fellowship United Methodist Church. If you recall, a little bit over a year ago, the City Council approved changes to our zoning ordinance that allowed for Christmas tree sales at institutional group assembly uses. And institutional group assembly uses are, for example, schools, churches, clubs, things of that nature, and where one might see the sale of Christmas trees customarily. So our City Council saw fit to amend our zoning ordinance to allow institutional group assembly uses to sell Christmas trees by special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals, provided that all of the same standards apply to the application as if it were a Christmas tree vendor in a commercial location. As such, the applicant applied last year for the same exact location at the church. It would be in the western parking lot, and would be in a 40 by 40 grass area where they would set up the trees just to the north of the parking lot, in between the parking lot and Highway 99. And the applicant has not decided whether or not there will be any tents associated with it in order to protect the Boy Scouts and the Boy Scout troop leaders from the elements, but he would like to reserve the ability to do so, to have those if needed. And there will also be a trailer, their Boy Scout trailer for supplies, that will be there at the edge of the parking lot, which will be adjacent to the area where they will set up the Christmas trees. We did not have any complaints on the operation of this Christmas tree sales lot last year. The site has passed its initial zoning and codes inspections and appears to meet all of the other criteria for temporary vending, specifically Christmas tree vending. According to the information provided by the applicant, the use is proposed to run from November 27th until December 22nd, and this is, of course, within the time frame that is allowed by the zoning ordinance. The hours of operation will be from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, 9 to 9 on Saturdays, and 1 to 9 on Sundays. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. The site must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to opening for business. An electrical permit must be purchased from the Building and Codes Department in order to obtain this inspection. And number two, the tents must meet all minimum building setback requirements for the RS-15 zoning district, and a tent permit must be obtained for the tents. And that would only apply if they do indeed wish to have tents, which that is undetermined at this time. Mr. Ongst was not able to be in attendance today. Mr. Wayne Moore, the gentleman right there, is representing the Boy Scout troop, and will be happy to answer any questions on behalf of the troop and Mr. Ongst, as will I if you have any questions for me either before or after the public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
I've got one, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Blomley, it looks like on their site plan, or I guess it's got 2008 plan that's in our materials here, up by the entrance, there's some, looks like been written in sign / with lights. If I remember right, they had a pretty big sign with a giant arrow on it last year, and I don't know if that was part of their approval. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, have they given you an idea of the dimensions of that sign? Are we approving anything outside the sign ordinance with that, or is that part of their application?
They have not They don't have any specifics in their application. They just said that what they will have will comply with the sign ordinance. I might defer that question to Mr. Moore to answer questions about whether or not their signage will be similar to what they had last year. I'm sure that whatever they would do, they would want to comply with our sign ordinance. And ask Mr. Moore to answer the question about their signage.
Okay.
Yeah, the signage, was an arrow that the boys fashioned out of, some poles and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
if that, if that's not allowed, we did, we're not asking for an exception, for that. So if that's not allowed, I mean, we'll not put it up this year and stuff. It was, mainly a project for the boys to do while, they were there.
Yeah. Well, I just remember seeing it, and my job's not to enforce sign ordinance, but I'm pretty sure that, we see those issues, and
Yeah.
if you want to put one up, you may just check with the city to make sure that it would meet the sign ordinance.
Okay, we will do.
And I can't remember if you had somebody holding it or not, but it seemed
No,
like it was in the ground.
Yeah,
and
it
pretty
was
big.
fastened to the ground and everything. We had stakes in the ground and out there. But like I said, I mean, yeah, if it's we
If you want to use that same one again, I would urge you to make sure it
Will
meets
do.
the sign ordinance, because
yeah
my
we
bet is it
probably
doesn't.
won't.
I will put him in contact with Ms. Kerr,
Yeah.
and they
You can give
discuss
him the
that.
dimensions and all that.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Moore, if you could just state your name and address for the record.
Wayne Moore, at 5432 Middlebury Pike, Murfreesboro.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I appreciate it.
Mr. Moore, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
You said there's going to be, or the application says there's going to be a generator for power. What do you all need power to?
Actually, the church has installed electrical box out there and stuff, so we will not need a generator this year and stuff. In years past, we required a generator because we didn't have any outside power to that, but the church has provided power out there as part of their lighting and stuff. So
Okay,
we will be putting up where we have the trees, we will be installing some lighting across, on top of the trees, and stuff, and we will, get a, electrical inspection, of course, for that and everything, but,
Okay, I was unaware that, I believe Mr. Onk's write-up states that they'll have a generator, if I'm not mistaken. I was not aware that they had put up is it a small little pole and meter that they put up over there?
no, it's an in-ground electrical box that that the church has installed as part of their it was when they were doing the expansion of the parking lot and everything out there. It was when they were remodeling the church and stuff. The church went through a major renovation and stuff here the past couple of years, so they installed this box as part of that. So we weren't last year we had to use a generator because the box was not installed. This year, they said that we could use that box and stuff, and it's tied into their their house electricity. And
Is it adjacent to the building?
it's I mean the box is right there on the concrete of the building or of the parking lot, right there at the edge of the parking lot. It's tied off of their site lighting that they have,
Thank you.
we've got the approvals from them, to use
Okay.
that.
And Mr. Moore, tell me about the tents themselves. They're going to be those little pop-up tents?
Yeah, the tents are just the 10 by 10 easy up pop-up
Yeah.
tents. They won't be for customer use. They'll be, if we do decide to put them up, last year, we really didn't need them. I mean, the boys don't like to stay under them anyways, and stuff. They're usually, out, we get them out, selling the trees and stuff. But, if the weather is real severe or something, usually we just take shelter in the church. But if we do decide to put them up, they're just the 10 by 10 pop-up green
Yeah.
tents and stuff. And, we will
And
provide.
and obviously, you're not going to leave them up overnight.
Oh, no.
Take them down.
They will come down. That's what the trailer's for and stuff. All the supplies, except for the trees and the lighting, will come down, every night
Okay.
and stuff. Everything else that we have out there, will be put into the trailer and
Okay.
secured at night.
Here's what I'm getting at, Matthew, and that is, really, what's the purpose of requiring the staff comments? You recommend the conditions of obtaining an electrical permit and a tent permit. I understand the requirement of passing an electrical safety inspection. I'll definitely give you that one. But is an electrical permit and a tent permit really necessary, given the very limited scope of what they're going to be doing out there?
An electrical
What
permit
purpose does it serve?
An electrical permit is required in order to get the electrical safety inspection.
Oh, okay.
Now, the tent permit it's called a temporary structure permit, in that anytime someone puts up a tent, whether it's at a business or at a church, they're required to come in and get a tent permit or a temporary structure permit.
And I suppose I could understand if it's one of those big 60 by 30 tents or something like that, but this is a tent that's going to be removed every day. They pop up all over the city of Murfreesboro day in, day out, probably 100 a day. I just don't know about the utility of every. What does a tent permit cost?
It's $75.
Yeah, that's just my own personal opinion. I don't know about the really usefulness of requiring a tent permit. What purpose would it serve other than charging this guy $75 to put up his tent?
Well, when someone comes in and gets a tent permit, we make sure that its location is going to be not blocking any traffic flow. We make sure that it's going to be meeting setbacks. And in this case, obviously, that's not going to be an issue. But I mean, we can't.
Just do it on a case-by-case basis.
We have to. Now, I mean, if tent permits are temporary structure permits are required routinely by our building and codes department, certainly if Mr. Whitaker, our codes director, says that for this type of tent it's not necessary, then certainly that would be at his discretion, and I'd be happy to. If you want to put a caveat in there that if at the discretion of the building and codes department or director that that a tent permit is not necessary, then the applicant will not need to get one. But what I wouldn't want to do is, if it's a uniform requirement that our codes department requires people to get tent permits for this size tent, then
So if we just if we left the staff recommendation number 2 out, then it would really be up to an rule interpretation by the staff as to whether a tent permit's required or not.
Sure, and
Okay.
I would be fine with that.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Moore? All right, thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other discussion, I would make a motion for approval of the permit, subject to staff comments, minus number 2. I would like to add a condition, though, that the signage be approved by the, building and codes. Any signage that's placed up would meet those requirements.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Moore, that application has been approved. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, we have an additional item of new business. It is a variance request. It is application Z09063 by Mr. John Callow of the City of Murfreesboro Community Development Department. This is for Ms. Rosa L. Phillips, requesting an 18-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures adjacent to North Spring Street. and a 20-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures. This is adjacent to the Elm Street side, in a residential duplex zone for property located at 803 North Spring Street. Mr. Baum, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Our last item on the agenda today is for two variances, as you mentioned, for a property that's at the northwest corner of North Spring Street and Elm Street. As part of the Community Development Department's distribution of community development block grant funding, they have a program in which dilapidated housing with structural issues that where it's not economically feasible to rehab the structure, they can go in and demolish the structure for someone who meets their criteria and rebuild the single-family house there. Ms. Phillips is the owner of this property, and Mr. Callow, representing the Community Development Department of the City of Murfreesboro, and as it represents Ms. Phillips, is seeking variances to rebuild the house on this lot. As you saw today on the ride around, the house is currently vacant. The lot is currently vacant. The house has been torn down within the last few weeks, and Mr. Callow would like to be able to build the house on the lot similar to where the old house was located. And based on the setbacks that are required in the RD zoning district, it would be very difficult to place a house on this lot, construct a house on this lot, and be able to comply with those setbacks. In addition, complying with those setbacks would make the house look very much out of place with the surrounding neighborhood. And Mr. Callow would like for the home to be harmonious with the surrounding neighborhood. One thing that I do want to make clear, because I was made aware by one of our staff members that we did get a number of calls that I think when people saw that the zoning was residential duplex, they automatically assumed that Mr. Callow was in the business of building duplexes, which is not the case. The RD zoning district allows duplexes and single-family homes. And Mr. Callow intends to replace the old single-family home that has been torn down with a brand-new single-family home. And I'll show you the elevations in a moment. He has actually picked a house style and elevations that are architecturally sensitive to the neighborhood around it to continue the look and feel of the houses of the era that were of this neighborhood. What I'd like to do is show you the survey provided by the Weiser Company. Mr. Callow, his initial request was because of the 30-foot front setback along Elm Street. It is a corner lot, so there are 2 front lot lines and 2 side lot lines. The lot is roughly 60 feet across the front, so having a 30-foot front setback along Elm Street and a 5-foot side setback along the north property line leaves only a 25-foot wide building envelope. Very few house plans would fit within that 25-foot wide building envelope, and the house plan that was specifically picked out for this lot is about 30 feet across. So the house plan that was chosen for this lot would not have been able to fit on this lot without variances. As you can see, the house is much more deep than it is wide to fit the long and skinny shape of the lot. The existing house was, or the old house that was on this lot was non-conforming in that it did not meet the front setbacks along both Spring and Elm. And so the house placement that you have in front of you shows the house at the locations that have been advertised with a 18-foot variance in the front, which would mean that it would be a 12-foot setback. And that was at the request of the planning staff to help try to line this house up with the houses to the north so that it would be consistent. One of the things that we didn't want to have happen is prior to Mr. Callow's tenure as the director of the Community Development Department, one of the houses that was built by Community Development was built meeting the setbacks of the zoning district that it was in, which meant that the house that was built several years ago was about 10 to 15 feet pushed further back than the existing houses, and it didn't blend in and fit in very well with the neighborhood. And then along Elm Street, where most of the houses are actually closer than the 30-foot setback would permit, the house could go as close as 10 feet to the Elm Street front property line if this variance request is granted. Now, with that variance request along Elm Street, Mr. Callow has some wiggle room to play with there. So if in looking at the surrounding houses felt that he needed to move it 11 feet or 12 feet off that property line, he could do so. He would have that wiggle room, whereas he doesn't with the current setback requirements. But what's before you shows the house as if it were to be built with the setbacks, with the variances that are proposed. Staff believes that the subject lot is a good candidate for the variance. We've seen many of these come before the board before, not only from Mr. Callow, but from Habitat for Humanity as well. The Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, which is used as a planning tool for the subject area, identifies this property as the Oaklands Mansion Residential District, and it recommends as a key design standard reduced front setbacks to better relate homes to the street. It recommends a minimum front setback of 15 feet and a maximum front setback of 25 feet. So the maximum front setback that it recommends is actually less than what the RD zoning district requires. A separate motion will be needed on each variance request, and if the board approves these requests, staff recommends the following condition, singular. A surveyor must help lay out the footing of the structure, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the structure is compliant with the actions of the board as well as all other setback requirements. And what I'd like to do now, so I know that Mr. Callow is very proud of these, to show you the elevations of the home. This is the front elevation as it faces North Spring Street. The overhead doesn't quite do it justice, but that's the front porch, which will protrude out from the home. And one of the interesting things about that front elevation is you can see the columns which frame the entryway to the home. This is the rear elevation facing west. This is the side elevation facing Elm, and there you can see the columns right there with the front porch. And this is the side facing the property line, or the property to the north. One thing that I did want to mention, because I know that the board is, one of the things that comes up when we when we look at these setback variances is parking. Will it be able to meet its off-street parking requirements? And with this being a corner lot, there's an existing gravel driveway that served the old house that comes in off of Elm Street. This house will be situated such that they'll be able to utilize that existing driveway and utilize the same parking area to the rear of the house on site, and so parking on the subject property and avoiding parking on the street should not be an issue. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Mr. Callow is here if you have any questions for him as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Mr. Callow, anything you'd like to add? Nothing about the Cardinals, please.
The what? 3 points I would like to make. Mr. Blomley's right. We're very, very proud of this project. The house that we had to take down was brick. Unfortunately, we can't afford brick, but the outside siding is going to be hardy board, so we think that's going to be a really good look. The house will be Energy Star certified, so that's really going to help the homeowner out. And I'd also like to call attention to the fact that the funding for this project is being funded through ARRA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So that's how we're using some of our ERA funding.
All right, thank you, Mr. Callow. Any questions for Mr. Callow? All right, we'll let you off easy. All right, then, at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or a motion. And we are taking these, remind the board, we're taking these separately. So we will, I guess, address the first request for an 18-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures.
Chairman Rogers, go ahead.
No.
I make a motion that we approve the 18-foot variance, subject to any and all staff comments.
I'll second.
All right, have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the 18-foot variance has been granted. We'll move now to the request for the 20-foot variance of the minimum required 30-foot front setback for principal structures.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the 20-foot variance, subject to staff recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Callow, both those variances have been granted. Always appreciate the work that you all do in getting these kind of projects underway, and I think it'll be a great addition to that neighborhood. Thanks very much. Okay, we'll move on now to staff reports and other business.
Chairman Rogers, the only staff report and other business that I have today is just to remind the board and the public that our November meeting will be on the 23rd, which is a Monday, as opposed to our normal Wednesday meeting day because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So that's being bumped up for 2 days to Monday, the 23rd at 1 p.m. here at City Hall.
All right, very good. Any other business? If not, then we are adjourned.